Okay, now we're on Facebook.
Yeah, we visited Ghazanchetsots, I think, Michelle. All right.
Is that the Facebook stream?
Yeah, I can't hear, just live now. All right.
Huh. I've never tried that.
It's working.
It's working? All right, here, share here. Share here. Okay, Mariam, I'm going to switch and give you the power of the host. All right, and then I'll just become the presenter tonight. Is that good? Can you all hear me? Okay, well, welcome to our virtual Fr.TAD Talks, virtual age, new age, and I usually do this in person, either at church, at our sanctuary. We have sometimes a projector and a screen, and sometimes I prepare videos for Fr.TAD Talk presentations. I've done a few of those, but today with everything going on, I thought there was a need for some education. With all of the, with so much misinformation out there about what Artsakh is, the roots of Artsakh, the heritage of Artsakh. There is so much misinformation out there, what kind of land it is and who it belongs to. I thought there was a need for some education about, you know, what really Artsakh is. And there is this ancient Christian heritage that we have. And it has been Christian since 4th century because it was part of Armenia. And Armenia became Christian, and Artsakh also became Christian with Armenia because it was part of Armenia, it was Armenian land. And we have not, it's not just a talk that I have today. I'm not presenting and saying, you know, Artsakh is Christian, Artsakh is Armenian, but there is actual historical evidence to back that up. There are monuments, there is architecture, there are churches, there are monasteries to back that up, that all these people, they live there and they created a heritage. It was their homeland. They created monasteries, they created churches, and there is this great Christian heritage that we have in Artsakh. And it's an important religious center, as you will see throughout this presentation for us Armenians. So let me go and share my screen to go into the presentation so we can learn more. Host disabled participant screen sharing. All right. Would you let me share my screen, Mariam?
I didn't disable anything, so let me just, I can only make you a host, it looks like.
Okay.
I can do that?
Yeah. Let's do that. Okay. Thank you. All right. Can you see it? Okay, so Armenian monasteries and churches of Artsakh, and as you can see on the right side, probably one of the famous and most beautiful monasteries that we have, a monastery of Gandzasar on top of the mountain. That's probably must visit place for many people who visit Artsakh, who visit this wonderful place. As I said already, there is a Christian heritage since coming to us since 4th century in Artsakh. There are monuments, there are khachkars, there are churches and monasteries, and it has been predominantly Armenian, predominantly Christian land and Christian homeland for Armenians for centuries. Even pre-Christian era, Armenians lived there. There are even some of the monasteries actually they are built on place of pagan temples, and as it was a case for many of the churches in Armenia as well. So some of these monasteries that we are going to talk about, they were actually already places of worship for pagans, and then later they become Christian churches there as well. So Armenians live here for centuries. Even there was some evidence about Armenians from Urartian times, from the ancient times, Armenians living there. Some of the oldest monasteries, Armenian monasteries and churches, just are in Artsakh actually. Some of the oldest that we have, and of course there is historical evidence that Saint Gregory the Illuminator's grandson, whose name was Grigoris, he actually visited these areas, and he was the first preacher in these areas. This area on Artsakh, they'll be called Nagorno-Karabakh, and all this area was part of a land called Arvanits area, and there was actually Catholicos at some point. There was separate Catholicos for Arvanits area. So there was, when Armenia became Christian, Saint Gregory the Illuminator, he sent his grandson to go on to preach and to evangelize in these areas, in Artsakh and Arvanits areas. And unfortunately, he was also martyred in that area too. He was killed in that area because the time was pagan. Mesrop Mashtos, the founder, the creator of Armenian alphabets, he opened schools in Artsakh, and you will see later in a specific monastery that he opened first schools alongside other areas in Armenia. So there is great historical evidence. This khachkar that you see here, this is the oldest known khachkar to us, and it is found not in today's Armenia. It is found not in Western Armenia. It is found not in Jerusalem. It is actually found in Artsakh. This khachkar. This is the oldest known khachkar to us. It is dated 866. It was found actually not far from a chapel in a village called Vaguhas, from cemetery chapel. And it is natural that a khachkar would be found in a cemetery, because the most common use for khachkars was as a tombstone. They would be it was most traditional for Armenians at the time. So this is the ancient, most ancient. This is the oldest khachkar, crowstone, if you will, of that we know today. And for those of you who are not familiar with khachkars, it is a specific religious and Christian art that specific to Armenians, and of course Irish. They are Irish Celtic crowstones as well, which are a simpler version of khachkars, crowstones that we have, because ours are more elaborate versions of crowstones. So they are carved crosses on the stone, and usually it is tufa stone that we use, which is soft but durable stone. If you live in Minnesota, if you visit Tsitsernavank, you'll see a beautiful khachkar crowstone right outside of our church that is brought from Armenia in 2015, as we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. So this is the oldest khachkar, and I know there was a historian some years ago, and he was really interested in finding the oldest khachkar. So this was the oldest khachkar he was able to find, and it is dated 866. The next one is dated 876, that it is found in Arad region in Armenia, dedicated to one of the queens of Armenia. But this is the oldest that is found in a cemetery in Artsakh. So there is this great heritage that we have, and great monuments that we have in Artsakh. This is the first picture when it was first found. I'm sure it's placed in a better place for people to come and see. This was a picture that he posted, the person, the historian, that he found. As we go to a monastery, this is the oldest monastery in Artsakh. It's called Amaras Monastery. As we can see, it's beautiful. It's right in the middle of the field. There is nothing around, and it is common to monasteries too. Their monasteries usually all built on top of the mountain, that nobody can bother them. Nobody would go, and there is no road. There is no, now we have roads getting there. We have even cable car going to Dadivank Monastery. But back then, they wanted to be as far away as possible from villages and from towns and cities. And Amaras Monastery is a little far from cities as well. As you can see, there is nothing around it. But this monastery was founded in 4th century. And it's actually interesting because officially the founder of this monastery is Saint Gregory the Illuminator. He founded probably few churches. Of course, the main church that he started in 301, the Cathedral of Holy Yeghishe. This is one of the few Amaras Monastery churches that Saint Gregory the Illuminator, started in Armenia. Of course, there were many that he tried to, and his children as well, who continued his work. But his grandson, Gregoris, is actually buried in this monastery. As you can see here, this is the tombstone of Saint Gregory, Saint Grigoris, who was martyred in this area in 348, and that's the tombstone that in Armenian we can see here. When I visited this monastery, I was able to go down and say a prayer here as well. It was probably in 2010. As you can see, he was a bishop, because on the tombstone you can see his head and the cross and all the vestments that bishop would wear. So this was a tombstone of Saint Gregoris, Grigoris, the grandson of Saint Gregory the Illuminator, who preached in this area, so he evangelized these areas. Founded by Saint Gregory the Illuminator, it was built by a king in these areas. He was called Vachagan Barebasht or Vachagan the Pious. He built many chapels and churches in this area. He was really a pious person, and he was a faithful person. So he built this monastery. And of course, later Saint Gregory's, he was buried in this monastery. Until now, this is the tomb of Saint Gregory's grandson of Saint Gregory the Illuminator. We don't even have a tomb for Saint Gregory the Illuminator. We don't know where his children, Aristarchus and others, but this is one of the few from his family that we know exactly, that we know that his remains are in this area. Saint Mestre of Mashtots, the inventor of Armenian alphabet, he actually, as he was going around Armenia, Sunik region that is next to Artsakh, as well, he was going north, as he was going west actually to Armenian side that belonged to Byzantium, and he preached in Byzantium. He opened schools in Byzantium as well. He also visited Artsakh, and he started school in Artsakh. Interestingly enough, he started school at Amaras Monastery, because there was already structure here, because there was already a church here, there was already a monastery here, so he established a school at Amaras Monastery. This became a really important center later for Armenian manuscripts, for Armenian writers, for Armenian historians. Amaras Monastery for a long time was an important center for Armenian Christianity, and it is today as well important religious center for all the pilgrims who would like to go and visit Artsakh. So that's one of the important places. If you make pilgrimage to Artsakh, Amaras Monastery is definitely on that list to visit. The tomb of Saint Gregory's grandson of Saint Gregory the Illuminator, to see the school and to see this beautiful site, Amaras Monastery. The monastery was actually renovated, and today it is functioning as a church. There is a priest there. I know the priest personally. I met him. He's actually from Artsakh, the priest. They're serving in this church. He was born and raised there, and he was educated at Holy Yeghishe. And then he went back and he started serving at this Amaras Monastery. It is functioning church, Amaras Monastery. It's a beautiful picture, as you can see, of the church. And as I said, after it was liberated in 1993, I believe, they renovated the monastery. The area is beautiful too, so it's a beautiful place. This is the inside of the church, as you pay attention, the altar is a little different. Usually Armenian altars, we have an icon, right? If you come to Saint Gregory, if you come to Saint Sahak, you'll see we have an icon of Saint Mary with Jesus, and most of the Armenian churches nowadays we have a different altar, but this is this is the older version of Armenian altars, and this comes to us from the Old Testament. So this is the Old Testament version of altars, and some of the ancient Armenian churches, older Armenian churches, this is the way. So it was just a simple table, and there was nothing around it. There was no icon or anything else. It was just a simple table to offer our badarak, to offer our prayers, to offer our worship to the Lord. So this version is the ancient version of Armenian altar. This is the inside. This is the sanctuary of the church. As you go in, you'll see it's a beautiful, beautiful place. This is the gate of the monastery. As you go in, you'll see all these cells that the monks lived. As I said, at some point it was a monastery. There were many monks living here. Today it is functioning, as I said, as a church. So it's not a monastery anymore. It's just a church. People go for liturgical services. People go for their sacraments, but there are no monks living here anymore. And monastery becomes a monastery when there are monks living in a monastery. If there are no monks, it is just a church for people to visit for specific services or sacraments they may need. So, but that is the gate of the monastery, as you can see. The next monastery that is really old and ancient is monastery of Saint Yeghishe, and I wanted to go chronologically and just from 4th century until even recently built churches and monasteries. This is a monastery of Saint Yeghishe. Again, it is 4th and 5th century monastery. As you can see, it is not in a good shape. It is not functioning as a church. You can see there is a lot of grass around. There is a lot of woods around it, so it's not maintained because it was not possible for a long time. It is actually in a Madaris village, Martakert region. As probably you heard a few days ago, this area was heavily bombed and shelled last few days, Martakert region, and even close to Madaris village. So this monastery is right in that area. And God forbid if something happens to this monastery, because this is really important center for Armenians. Unfortunately, after Artsakh was liberated, some of the monasteries, the Diocese of Artsakh was able to renovate. Some of the monasteries, they were able to reopen churches, but not all of them. Some of them are not possible, and of course, a lot of it depends on finances and different reasons. But this was one of the monasteries they were not able to reopen. They were not able to renovate, but it is still an important historical site, and it belongs to not to the diocese, as it is not functioning church. It belongs to the government as a historical site and cultural site, kind of. But it is an important monastic center for Armenians, and it was dedicated to Apostle Yeghishe. You may ask, there are 12 of them. Who is Apostle Yeghishe? Is that a 13 apostle? Who is Apostle? Apostle Yeghishe is actually one of the apostles of Saint Thaddeus and others who came. Saint Thaddeus and Bartholomew came to Armenia, but they had their own apostles too. They had their own followers too. So later, his apostle comes to Armenia. Yeghishe, who was one of them. And he preaches in these areas, and he actually was martyred in this area, and he's buried in this monastery. His tomb is found in this monastery, and it's an important site for Armenians, for pilgrims to visit this monastery. It is really the area is really beautiful, and Artsakh is actually the entire homeland, and I don't want to call it territory or land, because it's not a territorial land for us. It is our home. It is a homeland for us. Is really beautiful. It is quite different from from the rest of Armenia, because Armenia is rocky mountains and not many forests and green. But Artsakh is quite different because we see this a lot. There are beautiful mountains with a lot of green and woods, and even people cannot even go to these mountains because it's impossible to go, not to get lost. And probably that's the strength of Armenian side as well, because we know the mountains, we know, and people living there, they know the mountains, so they can defend themselves better too in these mountains. So this monastery is found on top of this mountain, in top of this area. It was actually built again by Vachagan the Pious, Vachagan Barepasht, who was as I said, mentioned earlier, who was a king in these areas. And as I say king, it is important to note that they were not actually Armenian. There was no actually Armenian kingdoms in this area. There were just different areas. They would call the leaders of this area, they would call themselves kings, but they were not king dynasty or anything kingdom, but they would just call themselves kings because it was a common name and common thing to do. But they were part of larger Armenia, or Medzhaik, Greater Armenia, as we would call them. But the leaders and people living in these areas, Nakharas, or ministers, as sometimes they were referred in Armenian literature, historical literature, they would call themselves kings as well. And he was buried in this monastery, Vachagan the Pious. He was, when he died, because he built this monastery as well, he built Amaras, so he was buried in this monastery later. And it was a sign of humility and being humble to be buried in a monastery. And if you go to Gerard Monastery, if you go to other monasteries, you will see that they are buried right on the ground, and people would walk on them. So it was a sign of humility too. So people would walk on their tombstones and go into the church and sanctuary. So he was buried in this monastery. This is the side of the gates, probably, of the monastery, and every monastery had a gate too, because they wanted to protect themselves too. This is Kataro Monastery, 5th century again, and it is not renovated, but people can visit this monastery and light a candle. But this is the highest monastery that it's just right on top of the mountain. In the land of Artsakh, probably in Armenia, we don't have any monasteries higher probably than this. It's built really, really high on top of the mountain. It is built in Hadrut region. And as you know, probably there was heavy fighting. Probably you heard heavy fighting in this region as well. Hadrut is south of Artsakh, and at some point they were able to occupy part of Hadrut, area. So this monastery is in Hadrut, and as there are claims that Hadrut is not part of Artsakh, Hadrut is not part of well, there is a monastery coming to us from 5th century in this area, because Armenians lived here, Armenians created here, Armenians worshipped here. And as I said, it's about 2,400 meters above from the sea, and there are different ways to measure this and level, but it's quite high. If you think about it, Mount Ararat is 5,600 something. This is 2,400. So it was not easy for monks to live here. It was not easy for people to visit this. This was really, they put really an effort to be away from everybody else. It was far away. The mountain is called Dizapite. And it comes to us from a story of Saint Gregory. As I said, he preached in this area, the grandson of Saint Gregory the Illuminator. And there were many who converted to Christianity in this area. But unfortunately, the rulers of this area, they didn't like that, and they martyred and killed a lot of people. And according to historians and history, they would put people and Christians on top of each other, like they would put wood on top of each other, and they burned them. And that's why the name came here, Dizapite, which means pile of wood. That's why the mountain received the name Dizapite, pile of wood. So it is the story quite quite difficult story of martyrdom of many Christians in this area after the evangelization of Saint Gregory's, the grandson of Gregory Illuminator. It is not well maintained, and of course, when Artsakh became part of, it was given to Azerbaijan as a territory, as an autonomous territory of Azerbaijan during Soviet Union. Of course, all these monasteries, they were not really maintained, and there was actually effort to destroy some of them, some of the ancient monasteries that I don't even have pictures or anything are destroyed. Some of the monasteries survived, but they are not really in good shape, almost ruins. And as you can see, this monastery as well. Next one that is really beautiful is Tsitsernavank Monastery, and it is again 4th century. These monasteries, they were founded in this time. They were founded earlier when Christianity still was spreading in Armenia and Artsakh. Tsitsernavank Monastery. You may think that Tsitsernak means a swallow and a bird in Armenian, but that's not what actually what name is. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it later. Tsitser actually means pinky in ancient Armenian, in classical Armenian, because pinky of Saint Peter the Apostle is actually, according to tradition, is buried in this monastery. The monastery was found on that relic, on a pinky of Saint Peter. So the ruler of this area, who was called Melik, in Armenia they were called Nakharars, ministers, but in Artsakh the rulers, they were called Meliks. Melik means a ruler of this area. So the Melik and the head of the village or town, he didn't like the priest in this area, so he would give him a hard time. So the priest kind of anathematized or said something to him that, I don't wish you any good luck or anything, something probably worse than that. So and after that, this Melik would get really in trouble and a lot of difficulties and challenges even in his personal life, and so he thought probably it's the priest who did something to me. So he went to apologize to him, but the priest was gone. So he went trying to find this priest, and he ends up in Rome, this Melik, because the priest was in Rome already, but he died. So he went after following him, but the priest was Rome, and he died, and he becomes a servant of the church in Rome. And he actually was able to find a pinky, or somehow obtain a pinky of Saint Peter and bring to Armenia and to Artsakh. And Tsitser in Karapar, in ancient classical Armenian, means pinky. So pinky of Saint Peter the Apostle is buried and found, relic is found in this monastery. It is a little different from architectural standpoint from other Armenian monasteries and churches, because this is a basilic structure. It is not cross shape as we have other Armenian churches. It's little Greek and Byzantium structure, and probably that was the influence of the person who lived in Rome and came back later and built this monastery. As already I mentioned, the story about Melik and the village priest. This is a beautiful monastery, and probably more famous than others that I mentioned to you. It's Dadivank Monastery, 9th to 13th century. Probably some of you visited this monastery. It is a beautiful monastery. Again, it is surrounded by beautiful Armenian mountains and green and beautiful mountains. It is functioning church today. There is a priest living there. There is actually church services going there. So this monastery, unlike other monasteries, was renovated after it was liberated, and it is part of the diocese of Artsakh. It is a functioning monastery today. It took a long time for them to build this monastery, 9th to 13th century. And of course, when we talk about monasteries, there are different structures. Usually there is one chapel, and then next to that chapel, there is a main church. Then there is another church, because there were many monks, they needed to worship, and sometimes they would worship in different places and different times sometimes too. So there are many different, in one monastery you may find different churches with different names. So that's why sometimes it took them 3-4 centuries to build a monastery. Founded by Dade, that's why the name is Dadivank, who was a student of Saint Thaddeus, and he came and he started a place, he started a church here, and of course he probably was martyred in this area as well. And usually wherever they are buried, wherever there was a chapel founded first, later the rulers, the kings, they would build a church in this area. In 2007, actually, there were new excavations in this area, and they found somebody buried in this area who was sitting on a throne. It was interesting finding. There was, and probably it was the king of this area, ruler of this area. But when they did some excavation in 2007, they found a grave and tomb of somebody who was buried, and he was sitting on a chair on a throne. So there is a lot of actually interesting things that happen in this area. All of these monasteries, they were not excavations done in this area, unlike Armenia, because it was part of it was given to Azerbaijan, and they didn't bother doing any of these studies about these monasteries. They didn't really, they were not really interested, and probably they couldn't do it either. So in 2007, they did excavations, Armenians in this area. They found some interesting things in even some they were not traditional, but they were the rulers and monks, and probably the abbot of the monastery. Functioning monastery until 1920s. It is interesting because some of the Armenian monasteries, they stopped probably functioning as monastery in beginning of 20th century, until 1903 or 5, when Armenia was part of Russia, they requested reporting from Armenian monasteries. They required financial reporting from monasteries. So the monks, they couldn't. They were, instead of praying, instead of service in liturgical, they didn't know how to deal with all these numbers, and they didn't have any capacity. So there was no motivation for monastic life. And then Armenian genocide came. So that probably, and then after that, Armenian monastic life in the Soviet Union. So until now, Armenian church is struggling to revive monastic life in the Armenian church. We don't have functioning monasteries today. We don't have monks today in the Armenian church. We have only about 800 Armenian priests. Armenian Church of Armenia from Holy Echmiadzin, as well as Antilias in Lebanon, all of us combined, there is about 800 of us. So there is not enough actually priests serving to our people. So we don't have that monastic life in the Armenian church today. So we need to revive, and that's what they are trying to do in Armenia. But this monastery, it actually was lived until 1920s. And after it was Soviet Union, it was given as territory, as autonomous territory of Azerbaijan. It stopped, of course, functioning as a monastery. It was closed, and Azerbaijani state really didn't. Azeri state really didn't care about any of this Christian heritage. In 1993, it was liberated. In 1994, actually, it was reopened and started functioning as a monastery, as a church until today. There is a priest living in this area. Interestingly enough, Mkhitar Ghosh, who is a well-known figure. If you go to Matenadaran, Lilet, you have been to Matenadaran. Michelle, you have been to Matenadaran. I'm sure, Mariam, you have been to Matenadaran as well as many of us. Mkhitar Ghosh, actually, there is a statue of Mkhitar Ghosh right in front of Matenadaran. There is Mesrov Master, there's Moses Khorenatsi, there is others, and among them, there is also Mkhitar Ghosh, who wrote this important book, Datastan Agirk, which was a collection of rules and laws, probably one of the first in Armenian history. So Mkhitar Ghosh lived in this monastery in Dadivank for some time, and he worked on his book, Datastan Agirk, in this monastery. So there is historical evidence of that Mkhitar Ghosh, who is in this picture, you can see, lived in this monastery and he worked on in this monastery on his Book of Laws, or Dadastan, Book of Judgment or Book of Laws. I didn't want to put Book of Judgment, Book of Laws sounds a little better. Anyway, Mahitar Ghosh lived in this monastery and he studied in this monastery. Next, we have Gandzasar Monastery, which is quite beautiful, and probably many Armenians visited this monastery. It was built. There is actually a specific date of founding of this monastery in 1240, July 22nd. It was a feast of Vartavar. It's interesting that July 22nd, it's around the same time in Feast of Vartavar is close to my heart because that's when I was ordained too, on a feast of Vartavar. So this church was founded and opened on this feast of Vartavar, Gandzasar Monastery, and probably one of the most beautiful Armenian monasteries ever created. I mean, beautiful Armenian churches, and the site is quite beautiful. There is no way, even if you're bad at taking pictures, there is no way you'll take a bad picture. There is no way if you just snap a picture of this monastery, it is going to be a beautiful picture. It is going to be big clouds and mountains around it. Even if you're bad at taking, you'll take a beautiful picture. This monastery is certainly one of the most beautiful monasteries. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, Artsakh was part of this area called Arvank. And Arvank, at some point, they had their own Catholicos. They were not separate from the Armenian church, but it was actually common. Sunik had its own Catholicos, Zangezur, we had Van, they had their own Catholicos, and it was common for these areas. They have their own leaders of the Armenian church. So Arvank, they had their own leader and Catholicos, like the head of the church. And this was the residency of that Catholicos. If you go on the left side, there are rooms, and one of the rooms was his room, actually. You can see his throne. You can see the throne of Catholicos, of Arvank's Catholicos. So this was important center for Artsakh, probably the most important religious center for Artsakh for a long time, because this was not only a monastic center, but this was actually administrative center for the Armenian church, in Artsakh. So this was an important place. Main church that you can see is St. John the Baptist Armenian Church, which by some professors in Sorbonne and others who studied Armenian churches, they put among the top 5 Armenian most beautiful, architecturally sophisticated and most beautiful Armenian churches. Of course, Holy Echmiadzin, St. Hripsime, Gerard, and others. So Gandzasar Monastery is among 5 most beautiful Armenian, architecturally most beautiful Armenian churches. During the war, the first war, 1990, 91 and 1996 or so, this church actually came under heavy shelling and fire. If you visit the church, if you pay close attention to the dome of the monastery, you'll see many bullets and that came to the monastery. They attacked the monastery, and we even see that happening today. So it's not that it was unusual back then. There was actually a priest who was serving here, Father Hovanes, and he was fighting among the soldiers in this area too. There are pictures of that, and they even sent a missile on the side. On the gate, there is this missile that was sent to the monastery, but it didn't explode, thankfully. And it didn't damage the monastery. So it is still there. If you visit a monastery, you will see. I have a picture when we take that out. And so this monastery came under heavy fighting because they wanted to capture and to get this monastery. But I mean, Armenians, they fought hard for this monastery. So there is some damage on the dome of the monastery. Some of this you can see, there is a person holding a church above his head. It's actually common architectural theme in the Armenian Armenian church. This was first found in Ani in Ani Armenian city in Western Armenia, which was known as city of 1,001 churches. So it was first King Gagik who was holding the church, the main church of Ani that he built. And after that, this was a common theme in the Armenian architecture, especially Armenian church architecture. You can see the circle of eternity. You can see Christ. You can see four evangelists. So this church is actually beautiful in architecture. Your church is beautiful place to visit and worship. Here you can see closely here. You can see the person holding. Usually it is either the founder of the church or the priest or Catholicos, whoever had a significant role in building this church. You can see the sign of the symbol of eternity as well as symbol of cross. So it's beautiful church. And actually, as you pay attention, the church that his person is holding above his head, actually, that's the main cathedral of Ani. So they still kept that theme, although it's on a different church, but it's still the same symbol. This is the sanctuary of the church. There is a narthex when you go, so it's very traditional. In the Armenian church, there is first narthex as you go into the church. That's the place when they would get ready. And those who were not baptized, usually they would stay in this area and wait until they were invited, until there was repentance and time and preparation. So there is narthex for those who were in preparation time, and then they would enter the sanctuary, which you can see is further down. So this is the narthex, and then they'll enter the sanctuary. Ghazanchetsots Cathedral, as we come chronologically from 4th century, 7th century, 9th century, 13th, and I tried to choose the most important, probably centers, well-known centers for all of us. This was 1888, built this monastery. Is probably relatively newer than some of the monasteries 4th and 5th century. So, and as you can see, it is the color of the church is not traditional Armenian, but this is traditional for that city. This is traditional stone. This is traditional view for that city. So that's why it is built with this specific white stone. It is in the city of Shushi, and this is the center of the Armenian church in Artsakh today. This is the cathedral of the Armenian church today. As I mentioned, Gandzasar was the center for a long time for Artsakh, but now this is the diocese. This is the headquarters, as you will, of the Armenian church in Artsakh today, the Armenian diocese in Artsakh. 1888, little different structure, but still traditional Armenian church. Maybe not the colors, but the main church is called All Savior Armenian Church, Amena Pergich Armenian Church. Beautiful architecture on it. You can see the angels. They are unique for this church, and unique symbols. They are not found in many Armenian churches and architecture, but they are found, and they are symbols of this church. As you pay attention on the dome you can see many of these angels around this church. All Savior Armenian Church. As we speak about also what's happening today, it is also important to note that this is not the first time that Armenians came under attack in Shushi or in Artsakh. In 1918 and 1920s, there were massacres of Armenians, in 1920s especially. And this was a picture after the massacres in 1920s. And the part of a church was destroyed as well. And as it was taken from Armenians, the territory became part of an autonomous region of Azerbaijan. The church was actually closed. Part of it was destroyed. The cross was taken down. All these structures, they were destroyed around it too. And it's important to remember all of these monasteries, they had land around the church. They had villages around the church. They would take care of the monastery as well. So all of that was taken away from them. The church was used as a storage. And at some point, it actually was used as a garage for them to park their cars or whatever they needed during the Soviet Union. So it was closed for the entire 70 years almost of a Soviet regime in Artsakh. The church did not function. But this was a symbol of liberation of Artsakh. This is 1990. 1994 already, when 1993 or 94. This is when Ghazanchetsots was liberated, when city of Shushi, and that was probably the first sign of Armenians liberating their homeland and a victory. So when Ghazanchetsots was liberated, that was definitely became part of a symbol of a liberation of Artsakh. It was actually destroyed, almost all of it, because Azeris, they would put some guns and weapons, and they would fire from this church, around this church, knowing that Armenians, they would not bomb the church. Armenians, they would not destroy the church. But of course, it came under heavy fire, and part of it, a large part of the church was destroyed during this time. But we are also people that we create, we renovate, we build again, and the church was built after that. Church was built all of these years, and as you can see, people celebrating here, people going on a church and liberation, and I wonder what is happening to all these people these days, and all these children who were born during war and raised, and probably some of them, they lost their lives these days too, fighting and defending and protecting their homeland. So these children, it is interesting. There was happy day for their parents and for themselves. Liberation of Ghazanchetsots, symbol of Artsakh. This person had a significant role in that. He was part of that liberation. He was one of the first people that entered that cathedral, Ghazanchetsots Cathedral. He is the primate of the diocese of Artsakh until now. Probably for 30 years or so, he is the primate. I saw his picture recently, and he doesn't have the same health, and probably all these years and seeing everything that he saw, it probably make him really difficult for him all these years. But he's a symbol of liberation of Artsakh as well. He's part of the he's the primate of the diocese, but he's also a leader that people look up to in Artsakh. He's the spiritual father of Artsakh, a symbol of liberation of Artsakh. In 2008, actually, there was this event that took place at Ghazanchetsots. About 500 couples, they got married at Ghazanchetsots. As you can see here, all these people, they are actually bride and groom. About 500 of them, and 500 here and 200 at Gandzasar. At the same time, they got married, and it was a beautiful ceremony, kind of revival of life, a new beginning for Artsakh. So 500 couples, they got married at Ghazanchetsots. It was a beautiful day. There was a godfather, famous Armenian benefactor from the village of Gandzasar, village of Vank, actually, underneath Gandzasar. The village actually is called Monastery, right underneath Gandzasar Monastery. So he was the godfather for all these couples, all these people getting married. So 500 of them here, 200 in Gandzasar. Beautiful scene, beautiful videos that we saw from Gandzasar. Just the opposite what we see these days happening, and probably I'm sure all of you know what happened to Cathedral. It was bombed twice. Part of it was destroyed. There was angel right on top here. I remember that was destroyed. Part of the sanctuary was destroyed, which is really sad to see. And it was deliberate attack. They may deny it. They may say it was probably an accident, whatever they say. But knowing how sophisticated their weapons and their guns are, I'm sure it was deliberate attack. Knowing how important this center is for Armenian people, how important center and religious center, and it's a center, a cathedral for Armenian diocese, and it's a symbol for Armenians. So that's why it was attacked one of the first days. As you can see, this is the sanctuary that was destroyed. Interestingly, when you go down underneath the altar, there is one area that is unique to any Armenian church, because when you go to that area, as you can speak, you can hear your voice coming back to you as well. And there was a reason for that, because the priest who was assigned to this church, he was the only one. Like I'm here, like myself here, I'm the only priest here. But on Sundays, actually, every Sunday I have to do special confession before I can celebrate a liturgy. And in order for me to do that, there needs to be another priest to receive the confession from me. Of course, there was nobody here. But this priest, he refused, and he said, somebody needs to listen to me as I confess, as I do confession. This is the tradition. I'm not sure how but that's the story that they are telling. So the architect of this church is, okay, I'll find a solution for you. They built this room that as he was confessing, he could hear his voice as well. He could hear him speaking as well. So it's a special room. If you go down to Ghazanchetsots Monastery, when you go and you speak, you can hear your voice coming back to returning to you. Sad scene to see, of course, bombing and all of this. It's unfortunate. But prayer never stopped in this monastery. People still are praying, and they still have services in this monastery. They have worship services in the monastery, and the priest is still serving. They're still offering prayers in this monastery. So despite all the challenges and difficulties, life goes on, and prayer, most importantly, goes on in this monastery. And how beautiful it was when about a few days ago there was actually a wedding after the bombing of this church. The couple that came and they got married in this church. And I hope that they'll live the rest of their lives in peace after they got married in this monastery. I hope that they won't go through any of this shelling and bombing and killings. I hope they'll be able to live as a family and to have children and to enjoy their lives together as they started in this monastery, these challenging and difficult days. Beautiful, beautiful day. I wanted to share this picture with you. This is a beautiful site, and you can see a rainbow, a renewal, and I hope this will be a sign of peace and promise and deliverance of God. And we hope that God will continue protecting this land and Armenians. But that's a beautiful site, a beautiful, beautiful scene. And this is the actually newest church in the city of Stepanakert, which is the capital of Artsakh. This church was built, I believe, last year, a year ago, 2 years ago, was the opening and consecration, as I should say, of this church. This is the newest church in Artsakh that was built a few years ago. Probably some of you who visited, visited Armenia, probably you tried grand candy, Armenian chocolate, or Armenian candy. So the family that own, they are the benefactors of this church. They sponsored the foundation of this church. And Stepanakert was a city that didn't have any of these monasteries or ancient churches, and so they built this monastery. They built this beautiful church in Stepanakert, and just a few days, probably a week ago or so, they had all these beautiful doves flying above this church and above Stepanakert, hopefully a sign of peace for Arabakh, for Artsakh, for our people living there. We have a beautiful and wonderful Christian heritage in Artsakh. People need to be protected. This heritage needs to be protected, and we need to preserve this and not destroy this heritage. These people, we live there for as you saw, probably from 4th century until now. We created this beautiful heritage. Armenians lived before Christianity, and after Christianity, there are important Christian sites, not only for Armenians, but for entire Christian world. There are some important religious centers in the land of Artsakh that people need to know about. And I don't want people to know Artsakh only as a conflict or a place where people always kill each other. There's always fighting, but there is actually a beautiful heritage in Artsakh. There is actually it is actually a beautiful place and Christian heritage that needs to be preserved. That's all I believe I had today. If there are any questions, let me see what time. It's almost 8, so perfect, about an hour. But if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer at this time.
Thank you for this, Father Tadeos. I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together and for giving everybody this historical context. I know that people know, Armenians know that we have ancient heritage, but to see it in detail and to learn so much about it, I didn't know about all the time frames and when the churches were built and all the intricate stories. And I just really appreciate you putting this all together for us.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you for your help today in moderating our Zoom meeting today. Zoom machine. Zoom machine. All right.
It was great.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Michelle. Appreciate all of you being part of this talk today. Yes, Lilette, you wanted to say?
Oh, I just wanted to say thanks as well. I didn't realize there were so many of the churches from the 4th and 5th century where they could, even if they're just ruins, that they still have, been able to maintain at least some of the history around them, and just being able to at least know that there was a church where there was a monastery and that it played such a critical role in that area in 700 1200 years ago.
Yeah. It is important to know that was the purpose, to educate Armenians and non-Armenians about Artsakh, about this beautiful land that we have. Yeah.
I did have one thought while you were going through. I wish I had a map with all the pinpoints of the different monasteries that you highlighted in the context of what we're looking at right now. Because I know I saw some of them when we went on our trip together with the group, but I can't place them all geographically.
Yeah.
I think there are maps out there. Maybe we can attach them to the Facebook live stream or put them on Father Tadeos's TAD Talk site after the fact, because there definitely are resources that show locations of the different cities and map. That's a good point, Michelle.
I like maps. So.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I'm glad you were able to come together and to learn more about Artsakh, and let us continue praying for peace in Artsakh. Let us continue praying for our people, and we hope that there'll be peace soon in Artsakh, and we all will be able to visit all these places that we talked about today. Thank you all, and Yeghishe.
Thank you.
Thank you.